How is the Trinity at work in and on the cross? That's what I want to talk about today. And lead in with the kind of question that philosophy, that these legendary semi-straw men, secular philosophers like to pose to naive Christians who are in college or high school and unready for their withering logic. Have you heard this question? If God is all-powerful, can he make a rock that's so heavy that he can't lift it? And the Christian's head is supposed to explode because you've never realized until now that the doctrine of omnipotence is incoherent and God couldn't be omnipotent. So therefore God couldn't be God, so might as well party this weekend. An appropriate response to that question would be, that's not what we mean when we say God is all-powerful. Self-contradiction isn't a power. So that kind of thought, though it's grammatically correct, is substantially in itself incoherent. But I have a kind of glib answer to the question that uncovers another aspect of the issue. A silly question deserves a silly answer. And one silly answer is to say, God did precisely that by making himself weak. In Jesus Christ, God has added into himself limitedness, ignorance of at least some things, physical weakness, mortality, not in a way that compromises the divine omnipotence, but in a way that shifts the categories into a place where philosophy just doesn't ordinarily go. So what Christians mean by God being powerful transcends the ordinary meanings of the term. Let's get to the heart of the question. Jesus Christ, the Father's only Son, was conceived and born and suffered under Pontius Pilate and was crucified, died, and was buried and descended to the dead. What does that mean? What does that mean about God? Here, when I use the word suffer, I'd like you to think of the synonym death here. It's not psychological suffering, it's mortal suffering, all right? Ancient Greeks, as well as ancient Hebrews, informed a conviction on the part of Jews and Christians that God doesn't die, all right? Divine nature is impassible. And this led to some of the mistakes that we've covered as people tried to figure out what had happened when the Word became flesh. Docetists claimed that the so-called death of the Son couldn't be real on grounds of divine impassibility. That's one way out. It's not an orthodox way out. Another way out, it's also not orthodox, is the way that modalists took. In Jesus, according to modalists, it's not just a person who dies, it's divine nature that dies. And so the cross shows us that divine nature actually isn't impassible. Divine nature is passible. God isn't immortal. It flies in the face of Israel's own understanding of God. God doesn't act like a creature because God is not a creature. And death is a creaturely quality that God doesn't share. So it seems like the easy answers about what happened on the cross are rejected because they're inadequate to the gospel itself. They're not what Christians have ever meant by the claim that the Son of the Father was crucified. Orthodox Christianity then arrived at this answer, which is shared across the controversy that I'm about to describe. Orthodoxy claims the Son suffered, one of the Trinity suffered, the person of Jesus Christ suffered, and the person of Jesus Christ is one person of two natures. Right? With respect to his humanity, he is mortal and he dies. With respect to his divinity, he's immortal because he is one person of two natures, you can say of him that he died. Just as you can say God has a mother, and on the cross, God shed his blood. So the Son suffered. The Son died. The creed means what it says. The Father didn't die on the cross. You can say the Father sympathized. The Father suffered along with the Son, but not directly, personally, bodily, only in that relationship. All right? The Son suffered and the Father sympathized. The word sympathy comes from pathos, suffering, right? And sim means with. 1 Peter 4 says the Son was put to death in the flesh, but he was made alive in the Spirit. Here's where that controversy reemerges, though. Within the meaning of that answer, that the Son suffered and the Father sympathized, and divine nature didn't suffer because divine nature doesn't suffer. Does the cross tell us what God is not like? Does the cross show us the death of a God who doesn't suffer? Or on the other hand, does the cross show us a God, does the suffering of the cross show us an expression of who God is? Do you get the force of the question? I don't want to belabor the point, but I want to make sure that you get the sense of it. And I'm going to show you these two positions, these two broad answers. These are the two most clear, stark representations of the two sides. So it's not as if the whole church is merely Eastern Orthodox or Lutheran, but Eastern Orthodox and Lutherans are the two who really press each side of the answer.